Hey everyone, Sam here. Strixhaven School of Mages just released on Magic the Gathering Arena, and we're going to crack some packs. I've got 53 packs here that I get to open, and I'm really excited to share this with you, see what we get, because it's going to tell me what I get to play, especially in Historic, over the next month or so. Couple of quick notes. Of course, these are store packs, so they're smaller than your draft boosters, but your Mystical Archive card is going to replace a common out of the pack, so you're never going to have a situation where you don't get your normal rare. You'll always get your rare from the pack and your Mystical Archive card, which means that you can have a rare and a rare Mystical Archive or two mythic rares. People have been a little confused opening up 10 packs at a time. They see their rares, they see some Mystical Archives, but they don't always see both at the same time. Since I'm sharing this with you, we're going to open them up one at a time so we get to see everything that's in here. If you watched any of my spoiler videos, you know I highlighted the cards that I'm most excited about in constructed formats, but we didn't really talk about limited at all. So if there's any particular commons or uncommons that stand out to me, I'll be sure to point them out as we go. So let's go ahead and jump on in. All right, first one. All right. So we've got our Inquisition of Kozilek. I'm really excited about this one. You know, I play Shadow in Historic, and Kozilek is going to slot right in there. Our rare from the pack is Confront the Past, which is a decent lesson. A little on the narrow side, but that's just fine. It could be a best of one sideboard card, even though the best of one sideboard is shrinking. Maelstrom Muse is a pretty exciting card in Limited. I think that's going to be fantastic in the Prismari decks. Yeah, I think that's what I want to talk about with this one. Let's go ahead and move on to the next. All right. Sign in Blood. I think this is going to be fantastic in Limited if you're able to pull it in some of your draft packs. I'm not sure this is going to have a home in Historic Constructed. Rushed Rebirth is a card that I'm really excited about. To the Battlefield tutors are typically very, very strong. Possibly more breakable in Eternal formats. You might see this in Commander especially. But one thing that a lot of people seem to miss on this is that the creature that is dying this turn doesn't have to be yours. So you don't have to wait until somebody's killing one of your creatures or have a sacrifice effect. If you are casting a board wipe or some single target removal and you have 2 extra lands, you might as well turn your opponent's creature's death into the creature you want to go grab. Really, really excellent card. Really happy to see that. Spectacle Mage is gonna be another excellent draft card in those Prismari decks. Exhilarating Elocution is gonna be more of a build around card. In the right deck, this could be fantastic because you're going to get an overrun effect and it's going to leave some counters behind. But it's going to be one of those where if you don't have the right deck, you're not able to go wide. It's just not worth drafting. I think those are the exciting ones. That's what we really want to talk about here. So let's move on. Faithless Looting, of course, a classic. One of the Historic decks I definitely want to try is it Phoenix? Faithless Looting definitely makes that possible here. We might see it in some Arcanist decks as well. It's going to enable so many things. Godpharaoh's Gift decks are definitely going to enjoy this. Tempted by the Arik is going to be a fun one. I think this is going to be more of a commander card than anything else, but stealing creatures is usually a pretty powerful effect. Wormhole Serpent is it's going to be good in Limited. It's one of those cards that once it comes down on the board, it's going to end the game pretty fast, especially in Quandrix decks where you're expecting to be able to activate this multiple times a turn, because notice it says target creature, not just itself, so you can get multiple things coming through. This is a solid finisher. Seeing it at uncommon is one of those things that tells you it was too annoying at common. So Wormhole Serpent's going to be pretty strong here. Dragon's Approach, we're going to see this in meme decks for forever. I wouldn't play it in Limited, though. And Pest Summoning, this is one of the lesson cards. Every college has their own version of this. Pest Summoning, I think, is one of the stronger ones. Yeah, all right, moving on. All right, so our first pack where our Mystical Archive card is not a rare, so we see it over here, it's Infuriate. I don't think we're going to see very much of this anywhere. You might draft it if you have the right deck for it. Beautiful art, though. I love the way this card looks. Velomachus Lorehold. Really exciting. I think this is going to be a really excellent jank card to play with. It's going to be a lot of fun. I don't think it's going to be particularly amazing, except in Commander. I think in Commander, if you put this in the 99, this can be a really excellent creature, especially if the cards that you're looking to cast out of your deck are extra turn spells. This is going to be a lot of fun. Test of Talents, in Limited, not super exciting. Definitely a sideboard card. It's essentially just negate for Limited. But as an answer in constructed formats, I think this is going to be really, really excellent. Yeah, I think those are the exciting ones here. Moving right along. All right, negate, gorgeous negate, still just negate. We've got a Clever Lumimancer. We did talk about this in our spoilers. I think this is going to be a really excellent card in multiple formats for years to come. I don't think you want to play this in Limited. All right, let's see what our rare is. Sparring Regimen, it's okay. I think this is not, it's an unexciting card, but it's a decent card. We have our first campus, at least the first one I've noticed. I think these campuses are fantastic, especially in Limited. You'll play these all day. It's a guild gate with an extra ability. When you're late in the game and you're flooded out, you don't have much to do, making sure every draw counts is fantastic. Love the campuses. All right, we picked up a Blade Historian. This is going to be a really, really fantastic card in a lot of aggressive decks. Because it's all hybrid, of course, this doesn't have to be in a Boros deck. It can be in one that just touches red or white, even though that's pretty hard to cast. Of course, the most exciting place for this is in Winota. Winota can grab it. It makes your attacks fantastic. It's a great, great card in Winota. Mystical Archive, Blue Sun Zenith. Absolute classic. Of course, it's going to be fun in Historic Brawl. That's going to be a good spot for it. But I think it's also playable in Limited, especially in Quandrix decks where you're going to be ramping a lot and you can Zenith for big numbers. Typical play pattern is to cast it for reasonable value early, shuffle it back in, and then target your opponent with it on a later turn to mill them out. What else do we have here? Detention Vortex. Please don't play this card. Please don't play this card. Tome Shredder is, I think, going to be the linchpin of the Lorehold decks. I'm really excited about Lorehold in Constructed. I'm a little less excited about it in Limited. Red and white, to me, seem to have the highest number of unplayable cards. The dirt that you want to avoid drafting, filler that doesn't really make it in the modern era of Limited. But if you are in Lorehold, Tome Shredder is going to be essential. It's going to be one of those things that is the easiest way to enable all of your Lorehold synergies with stuff leaving the graveyard. It's going to be an important one. Rise of Exodus, I think, it's going to be all right. Again, because it's all hybrid, it's going to make it easier to put into decks that are not just Silver Quill, and being able to exile a creature and then get yourself another card is going to be worth it, even at 6 mana. All right, moving on. All right, multiple choice. This is a fun card. We talked a little bit about this in my spoiler video. It's essentially a modal spell, but it's an X-modal spell. Getting to do any one of these things when they're relevant is fantastic. If you're able to cast it for 5, you do all of them, that's great. What's exciting me about this right now is that our Mystical Archive card is going to be a rare. Chaos Warp. So Mythic Rare. I don't think this is playable in Limited. This might be a Historic Brawl card, especially if you're playing a little more casually. It's a Commander staple. It's one of those ways that Red gets answers when it doesn't have fantastic answers. But I don't think it's something you really want to play very much in Limited, and I don't think it's going to be a big deal in Historic. As for our other cards here, our commons and uncommons, Practical Research is going to be really, really nice in that Prismari deck. That deck looks like the kind of deck that's going to want to play a little bit more of a controlling game where you stall things out, ramp up, and play your big stuff. Practical Research is really going to help you do that. What else do we have here? Springling Servant. This is another one that I would recommend you avoid. This is really just filler. It's not super exciting. Go Blank is going to be pretty solid. So it's your Mind Rot, but it's Mind Rot plus, and that's going to be reasonably helpful from time to time. Just make sure you leave it in your sideboard in case you come up against a Lorehold deck, because then you're doing all their work for them. All right, moving on. Claim the Firstborn, of course, already historic legal, really fantastic in those Jund Sacrifice decks. This is just gorgeous. Really happy to pick up a copy of this one here. Draconic Intervention, this is that board wipe, and I think this is a really, really excellent red board wipe. This is definitely going to see some standard play at some point. Prismari Pledge Mage, I think, is going to be an essential card in those Prismari limited decks. A 3/3 defender is already where you want to be. It's going to gum up the board because people can't just attack into it and know that you're going to block something. You're going to kill something with this. The fact that it can attack sometimes is kind of icing on the cake. There might be a Prismari aggressive deck that takes advantage of creatures like this, but even just as a defender, this is fantastic and limited. Reject is a little too narrow. I don't think this is something that's going to see play in limited. It might be a sideboard card in constructed. All right, moving along. Another Infuriate. Thrilling Discovery. This is a card that's going to be exciting in constructed. Again, I wouldn't play it in limited, but this is another one of those that's going to get stuff into your bin when you want it, and it's a little safer than Thrill of Possibility, which is kind of what it's mimicking here. A rare, Gnarled Professor. So 5/4 trample, that gets you another card. I think this is going to be a decently playable card. It's a little above rate, which is good, and it gets you a replacement in hand. Even if the replacement isn't super exciting, this is worth it. All right, moving on. Agonizing Remorse, definitely a playable card, definitely playable in limited, pretty excellent card. Let's see what our rare is. Just a wild card, fantastic. That is the wild card I need the most of. We got our Spirit Summoning here. I think this is the next summonings card that we've seen. This is not one of the stronger ones, but I think I'll take just about any summoning card in limited if I don't have a better pick. Just toss it in the sideboard. As long as it's castable, it's worth having around. Biograph, I think, is fantastic. Having pests around in your Witherbloom deck is going to make enabling a lot of cards like this really, really, really easy. And going something like Unwilling, I can't remember, the 1/1 frog that's Unwilling Ingredient. Going that on 1, sacrifice it into Biograph on 2. You got a 5/4 on turn 2. That is really, really excellent. And then later in the game, you don't have to sacrifice if you can pay that extra 3. A 5 mana 5/4 is still just fine. I think that's a really excellent place to be in those Witherbloom decks. 10 packs down, 43 to go. Biblioplex is a rare. I'm definitely excited about this in control decks in particular, of course. There might be some hyper-aggressive decks that expect to empty their hands, in which case this is a decent way to refill. Everybody always wants to compare it to Library of Alexandria, and of course it's not Library of Alexandria. It's the fixed version, which is good because the other version is completely broken. Zephyr Boots. I think this is one of the few artifacts that's actually playable in limited. I think most of them are something you want to avoid. Having a looting effect on an equipment is great. I'm really, really excited about that. Needlethorn Drake, I'm here all day for this. I'm really sad this wasn't a Strix because it would be the set's version of Baleful Strix, but it is what it is. Definitely play this in limited for sure. It might see some constructed play. Flying Death Touch, it's always going to trade with something. And we've got a Harmonize. Definitely a playable card in limited for sure. Might see some constructed play, but there might just be better ways to handle that in historic. But yeah, 4 mana, draw 3 cards. I will draft that every day of the week. All right. Adventurous Impulse is a decent card. We're happy to see it here. Sparring Regimen, already got one. We talked about that. Letter of Acceptance, I think, is one of the few other artifacts that'll see some kind of play. It is fixing. It does draw a card. If you're in one of those decks that needs a lot of ramp, if you're in Prismari or you're in Quandrix, you might play this, but it's rather unexciting. All right. Strategic Planning, I think this is definitely a Prismari draftable card. I don't think we're going to see a lot of play in Historic with this. Reconstruct History, I talked about this when it was spoiled. I definitely think this is a commander card for sure, especially in Casual. I don't think you want to play this in Limited, in large part because out of all these permanent types you're getting back, Creature isn't one of them. And creatures are really the linchpin of Limited and how it's going to work. So Reconstruct History, it is going to trigger a lot of lore hold stuff, but I think this is really more of a commander card than anything else. Valentine, Dean of the Vein. This is going to be fantastic Limited. The flip side is decent as well. But of course, when you're playing this against Jund Sacrifice in Historic, it's a 1-mana way to shut them down until they can remove it. I think this is going to see a lot of sideboard play in Historic. All right, moving right along. Got our first fancy Shock. Shock, of course, is a staple in Historic at this point. It's definitely worth playing, and I would go ahead and draft it too. It's still a good card. Even though Lightning Bolt is in the set, I'm drafting Shock for sure. Zimone or Zimini, I'm not quite sure exactly how we want to pronounce this, but she is an absolute house in Limited. If you're playing a Quandrix deck, or even if you think she's splashable, draft this card. She is absolutely bonkers. When we think of our guild sets, our Ravnica sets, we always talked about the Apprentices being like the top tier uncommon that tells you what that guild wanted to be doing, and they did it really, really, really well. The Apprentices in this set are not as good, and I think it's because these legendary creatures, the named students, are all fantastic. I don't think there's a single one of them that's bad. That being said, if you're in Quandrix, the Apprentice is a kind of a step above the rest. I think that's the one Apprentice that's really exciting. But if you see Zimone Zimini, go ahead and draft her. She's great. All right. A rare Mythic Wildcard. I will take that. All right, we got to Revitalize. I'd say it's a playable card in Limited. It's one of those cards that it's unexciting filler, but it's not bad filler. So you can definitely play this, especially if you have Magecraft stuff that you want to be able to trigger. The fact that it's a cantrip is worth mentioning. Our rare here, Double Major. I think this is definitely a playable card. Copying legendary things is not always easy to do. This one just gives you a really efficient way to do it. It just restricts you on timing. You have to do it when you cast that spell. There's going to be some decks that want this. I think it's going to take a little time for the format to find the best way to use this, but it's going to be worth having around. I think Mentor's Guidance is going to be decent. It's not exactly Scry 2, Draw 2. When you can enable it, I think it's going to be very easy to enable, even in Limited. But Scry 1, Draw 1, Scry 1, Draw 1 is still an effect worth having, especially at the cost of Divination, because you're adding those 2 Scries in. It's better than Divination, and I would play Divination in Limited. So this is a good place to be. Mage Hunter, I think it's going to be fantastic in Limited. I don't think it's going to be that sideboard tech that shuts down your Storm opponent, but in Limited, I think this is definitely playable. The Witherbloom Pledge Mage, I think it's going to be alright. Just as a 5/5 for 5, that is a decent rate. The fact that you get some life gain off of it, and you have some elements of your deck that care about life gain, are going to make it decently worthwhile. Arcane Subtraction, I think it's okay. Not super exciting, but this is one of the better ways to learn that doesn't leave you a permanent behind. Lets you win a combat and replaces itself. I think that's going to be decent. All right. All right, we got our first Pretty Duress. This is one of the few Mystical Archive cards I actually don't know if I'm going to play this version of, just because I really, really love the old art that we already have here on Arena. But happy to see it here. It gives me some options. Golden Ratio is one of the very few Quandrix cards that I think is something you don't want to draft. I would go ahead and avoid this one. There's too many times it's just going to be dead. And even if you have a board that sets up well to get you a lot of cards, people can kill your creatures in response and reduce the amount of cards that you draw. Don't think it's very exciting. Here's our Elemental Summoning. Again, decent. It's not one of the most exciting ones. Our rare, another Sparring Regimen. Looks like I'm going to complete that set over the course of this. Okay, here we go. Another pretty negate. Igneous Inspiration is, I think, absolutely fantastic in Limited. 3 damage to any target is great. Even at 3 mana, I know that we can get Bolt in this format, but I don't care. This is great. Having the Learn tacked on just makes it's icing on the cake. This is fantastic. Burog Befuddler, I think, is definitely a card that is going to be playable. I would say it might be a Quandrix card more than anything else, letting you win a combat, get a surprise block in. I think this is going to be a decent card. Yeah, and here we go, Umbral Juke. This is another one worth talking about. Edict effects are usually a little weak because your opponent just gets rid of their worst thing, which is often not the thing you want to get rid of. But there are some times when edict effects are great, forcing your opponent to sacrifice something really, really spectacular. So having this be a modal spell where you can at least get a 2/1 flyer, if the edict isn't worth it at that time, makes this card fantastic. This is going to be an all-star in Limited. Go ahead and grab this one. Don't let the edict effect scare you away. Modal spells are a-okay. Semester's End, I forgot to click on that there. That's definitely going to be a combo card. We're going to play that quite a bit. What Yorian has taught us is that mass bounce spells are pretty darn good. All right, next one here. Faithless Looting, super happy to see it. I definitely need multiple copies of this. All right. Sideboard card, it's important to talk about strict sideboard cards here in Limited because they're often just going to be replaced by our lessons. Having a card that you're going to sit in your sideboard and bring into the main deck is a little less valuable than a card that you can leave in your sideboard and go grab only when you want it. So Tangle Trap, you might value a little less than similar effects you've seen in other Limited environments. Professor of Zoomancy, getting you 2 bodies is great. I would play this in Witherbloom Limited decks all day long. All right, our rare, Hardness Infinity. Don't quite know how this one is going to be used and constructed yet, but it's definitely going to be used. And of course, Seb McKinnon, I think this is his only card in the set. Really, really gorgeous art. I absolutely love this one. All right, moving right along. All right, lots of wild cards here. Very happy to see that. Skirt Colony, I think is filler, but it's okay filler. It's one of those that kind of scales with the stage of the game. It's just good early and good late, and a little weak in the middle. A 2/2 for 2 is something that you're going to play most of the time. This also has reach, so it's definitely a playable card. The fact that it turns into 4/4 if you make it that long in the game, it's okay. I think the thing that's hurting this the most is that Quandrix and Witherbloom both have a ton of support. They have the highest number of high-value cards and the least number of low-value cards. So Skirt Colony might just not make the cut a lot of the time. But if you have to play it, I wouldn't be too sad about it. Pop Quiz, I think it's all right. Draw a card and then draw a card out of your sideboard. It's another almost divination. I think it's okay in Limited. All right. Each player loses 2 life. You draw 2 cards on Crushing Disappointment. This is one that's going to be playable some of the time in Limited. I think there's going to be the occasional deck where your opponent losing 2 life matters, and getting that refill is going to be okay. I think this is more of those Silver Quill aggressive decks where you're really just trying to beat your opponent down and your own life total doesn't matter too much. I think that's where this is going to have a home, but I think you only want one of them. This isn't something I would draft 2 or 3 of. Sign in Blood, we already talked about this one, so we can go ahead and move on. Vanishing Verse, this is a really excellent piece of removal. Of course, if you're in the Silver Quill deck and Limited, you draft this all day long. This is probably going to be a sideboard card in constructed formats, but it's a really, really, really excellent one. Humiliate, I think this is decent in limited. Being able to get any non-land card and then getting a +1/+1 counter to work with your Silver Quill synergies, definitely worth drafting. There's our Lumimancer, Quandrix Pledge Mage. Putting counters on it is nice. The fact that those counters stick around is definitely helpful. I would say it's definitely a limited playable card. And then Mana Tithe. Yeah, I would definitely draft this. There's going to be moments in limited where you're going to get this early and it's going to catch somebody out early. But even in late games where people have a ton of extra mana, we're playing with Quandrix and Prismari decks, which want to use all of that mana. So if somebody, they draft their Magma Opus and it's a mythic rare, their whole deck is built around trying to get this card out, and then you Mana Tithe it, that's going to be fantastic. I would draft this for sure. All right, we got a pretty eliminate. Of course, this is already legal on Arena. Solid removal card. Now it's pretty. Gotta love that. Thunderous Orator, I think, is going to be a pretty darn good aggressive card. We see a lot of keyword abilities in both Lorehold and in Silver Quill. And the more of those you have on the board, the better this is going to be. If you don't have anything else, it's still a 2/2 with Vigilance for 2, which is just fine. Solve the Equation. Less exciting and limited unless you have a really, really excellent game-winning bomb that this is just your extra copy of. Otherwise, I don't think it's really worth it. But this might, again, see Brawl play, maybe some Historic play, but I kind of doubt that. And we got our first Snarl. So the dual lands from this set, I think these are definitely playable in Standard and maybe even in Historic. They're not the most exciting ones, but as the continuation of our reveal lands from previous sets, we know that they have some applications. They saw play in Pioneer for a little bit, especially in the blue-white control decks. So happy to see a Snarl here. Another Claim the Firstborn, Mortality Spear, really top tier removal in limited. Even if it was always 4 mana, instant, destroy target non-land permanent, you take this card every day, every single time. Fantastic card. The fact that sometimes it can only cost 2 is great. If you lost a pest this turn, then this is better than Assassin's Trophy. It's really, really spectacular. Devouring Tendrils. I think I saw one of these earlier and I forgot to talk about it. It's a bite card, which is sometimes a little safer than a fight card, and then you gain 2 life on top of it. This is Green's version of fantastic removal. This is another one that you target. If I were pack one, pick one, and my options were between these two, I would probably take the Tendrils just because it leaves me open for Witherbloom or for Quandrix, but I think overall Mortality Spear is the better card. So if you find yourself in Witherbloom or you think this is splashable, draft this card. Conspiracy Theorist. I love the design on this card. I don't think this is going to see a ton of play. Maybe in Commander or competitive Commander in certain decks. I think that there's going to be some janky decks in Modern that might try to use it, but those are not going to be meta decks, not really solid decks. But I love that this turns combines red Impulsive Draw with other red Rummage effects. It's just really, really intelligent design, really creative way to get red card advantage in a uniquely red way. I really, really like the design of this card. All right, we got our first Pretty Village Rites. Of course, this card is seeing play in Historic and in Standard, I think. Decent card. I would draft this in a Witherbloom deck. You're going to have pests to ditch to it, but you've got to be able to have that food to feed to it, right? Our Lorehold Apprentice, this is one of those examples of the apprentices that are a little less exciting, right? They're okay. They're playable. At its base level, it's a 2/2 for 2. It's got a little bit of upside, but you're not going to have a ton of spirits, and you need to have enough spirits out that when you trigger this, they can do something, and it can't ping creatures, so you can't use this as removal. It only hits the opponent. It's playable, but it's not super exciting. Pigment Storm is definitely playable. This is removal. It's expensive removal, but that's okay. The fact that excess damage goes through to your opponent is definitely worthwhile. Elemental Masterpiece. This is the big Prismari spell that is the least exciting out of the group. There's one, I think, at every rarity. This one is it's mediocre, but if you can ramp up to it pretty quick, then it's decent. And of course, if you're able to copy it, that's great. So if you have the right deck, this is playable, but I think most of the time in Limited, this is not going to be one of the ones you include. Carrick Wrangler is... it's fantastic. As a 5-mana 3/3, it's a little unexciting, but the fact that you get to pump any of your creatures permanently is really, really spectacular whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell. This is going to be one of those cards that when it hits the table, if it's not answered immediately, it will win the game. This is definitely a card worth drafting, and it fits very well into both Witherbloom and Quandrix. All right. Mage Hunter's Onslaught. This is going to be another premium removal spell. The fact that it's at common is spectacular. Destroying a creature or planeswalker for 4 is great, even if that was all that was on it at sorcerer speed. This is a good card. If you're able to then turn this into extra damage when you're attacking, that's spectacular. I think Silver Quill decks in particular are going to love this because you destroy their best blocker, swing in with the wide board that you have built, and then they have to block a ton of it and they still take a whole bunch of damage. Our rare, Manifestation Sage. It's 2 bodies. You need to have a decent sized hand for this to be good, but it's going to be decently good. I think this is more limited than anything else. Moving right along. Accomplished Alchemist is one I'm really excited about. This is going to make an absolute ton of mana in the right deck. Don't know exactly where its home is going to be in Constructed yet, but it will find one. We got another legendary named student here, Dina or Dinah. I'm going to go with Dina. She's great. She's a slightly worse veto, but a slightly worse veto is still spectacular. You play this with a whole bunch of pests, and she's going to end games very, very quickly, especially because she's a sacrifice outlet already. So she gives you that option to run that engine in the Witherbloom decks. She's going to be fantastic. Croson Grip, I think this is it's sideboard tech. I don't think it's going to see a ton of play. Split Second is nice, but it's still just destroy target artifact or enchantment. Again, it might be a more casual historic brawl thing, but that's about it. All right, our first Efreet Flame Painter, really exciting card. Casting stuff out of your graveyard for free is something that's going to be really, really fun to do. I don't yet know if this is going to be competitive or just kind of janky fun, but this is a very powerful effect if you can enable it well. Kelpie Guide, I think, is fantastic in Limited, especially in those Quandrix decks. As a blue mana dork, essentially, early in the game, and then if you get into that late game, you get to turn it into an Icebind Pillar, Icy Manipulator. Really great card. This is going to see a lot of play in those Quandrix decks. And we got a Regrowth. I think in Limited, it's okay. It's unexciting, but it's okay. Getting to put any card you want back into your hand it's all right. I don't yet know if this is going to see historic play, but with Time Warp in the format now, it's definitely possible. All right, we've got another Eliminate. I think we've talked about just about all of these, so we're going to talk about some commons. We got our Owlin Shield Mage, a 3/3 flying for 5. That's a really unexciting rate. It's not going to impact the board a ton, and we're in a format that has a decent amount of flying. So it's not like, well, I can't remember the set, but there was another Orzhov 3/3 flyer for 5 that was a good card to draft, but it was because there wasn't a ton of flying in the set, so that card just ended games. We have a lot of flying in this set, but with Ward on it, it's a little bit happier. your opponent's going to have to pay 3 life in order to do anything to it. So if they can't answer it, then it has an opportunity to make an impact. Then over here, another 5 mana common. We've got a 3/4 with haste, the Augur Battleseer. I think this is definitely going to see play. Just for virtue of the fact that you're getting some choices here. Do you want to go and beat in? Do you want to use the ability? I think in these Prismari decks, you're going to be able to use this to help gum up the board and then start scrying into either the more ramp that you need to cast your big spells, or if you've already got that established, go find those big spells. So I think this is playable. I don't think you want a ton of these in your draft deck, but it's worth picking up. Hall of Oracles, again, I clicked in the wrong spot here. I think it's an okay card. I think that's the one that puts a counter on a creature. It's okay. Whirlwind Denial, I don't think you're going to want to draft this, and I don't think it's particularly exciting in Constructed either, but my goodness, look at this art. This is absolutely gorgeous. Nothing too exciting here, so let's go ahead and see what our rare is. Baleful Mastery. I'm excited about this one. Maybe I was a little overexcited in my spoiler video on this one, but exiling unconditionally a creature or planeswalker for 2 or 4 is great. Giving you the choice of whether or not it's the right time to pay 2 or to pay 4 is part of what makes this powerful. There's going to be times when you can't cast it for 4, but you can for 2, and then it's really nice to have that option. Giving your opponent a card sometimes is less burdensome than dealing with whatever they have currently on the battlefield. So I think Baleful Mastery is going to see some play for sure. Another Village Rites. Snow Day, I think, is going to be a decent top-end card. Tapping down and freezing 2 creatures and then allowing you to draw 2 and discard 1. It's going to be a decent way to buy time and refill. I think this might be more of a Prismari card than anything else because you're going to be wanting to buy some time. But you might see this in Quandrix, but more as a finisher where you're more concerned about tapping down the creatures than drawing the cards. Pilgrim of the Ages, I think it's going to be another decently playable limited card. These cards that have some kind of ability to recur themselves are usually tough to deal with in limited because they go away, they come back. It's okay that it costs a ton because in limited you're going to have the time to do that. I think this is going to be a decent card. Love the Command series. Silver Quill isn't the one that excites me the most. I really like the Prismari one, but the Command series, the cycle is really pretty excellent. All right, 25 left. We're a little bit more than halfway here. Got another Snarl. Happy to see that over there. Make Your Mark is going to be a decent way to enable Magecraft abilities in limited, but I think that's about as far as this goes. Aether Helix, I think, is a decent card. It's definitely kind of like B, C tier. Getting something back to your hand while getting a tempo play on your opponent is going to trip some people up for sure. This is going to make waves in limited, but it's going to be one of those cards where, again, you don't want a ton of them. I would put 1 or 2 of these in my Quandrix deck. Fracture is spectacular as a sideboard card. In limited, this might not see a ton of play just because, again, creatures are really what you care about. But as a sideboard card in constructed formats, Fracture is going to see a ton of play. All right, we got a D-Spark. I would draft this in limited for sure. Exiling something big is always good to do in limited, and you're always going to get to the point in the game where somebody has something big worth exiling. As for Historic, it's already legal there, so this is just a pretty version. All right, here's another command. We got our Quandrix command. Again, Prismari is the one I'm most excited about. Reckless Amplimancer is a decent card in draft again. It's another one of those 2 for 2s with a little bit of upside. This is going to be one though that in the middle game it's really, really unexciting. This is one where you really need it in the early game or late game and nothing in between. This could get out of control in Quandrix decks where you can activate it more than once per turn. Because if you can toss a couple of counters on it and then double its power and then double its power again, well then it's going to be pretty darn big. Another Inquisition of Kozilek. You love to see it. This is going straight into my Mardu Shadow decks. Gotta love this card. I am so excited to be playing this one. Devastating Mastery. This is an interesting one because it destroys all non-land permanents. This is our planar cleansing, but you have that kind of, just like our black removal spell from earlier, you have the option to pay less, and your opponent gets to save 2 things by putting them back in their hand, but then they have to recast them. As for outside of it, it still just costs 6. Now it's 4 white, but 6 is a decent rate for this. This card could see some play depending on how costly it is for your opponents to get those 2 permanents back. But as a tempo play, it might be worth it. Inkling Summoning. This is our first Inkling Summoning. This is the other summoning card other than Pest Summoning that I'm actually really excited about. The fact that this has flying is a big deal in limited environments. I think this is a great card. I would put as many of these in my sideboard as I'm able to get. I draft this in every single pack it's in if I don't have a better card that goes in my deck. All right, Flunk. Flunk is a very exciting removal spell. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, where X is 7 minus the number of cards in that creature's controller's hand. So if you do the math on this, if they have 4 cards in hand, then the creature gets -3/-3, and so on. Most of the time, this is going to be unconditional removal, because this is going to be -3/-3, -4/-4 for 2 at instant speed. That is great. If you get into the late game, people's hands are going to shrink. There's a good chance this is 2 mana -7/-7. It can kill just about anything at that point. I think this is a great card. You definitely want to draft this one. Electrolyze. Electrolyze is super exciting and limited. If you have the opportunity to draft this, go ahead and draft it. I don't know if this is going to make any kind of constructed impact. 2 damage at 3 mana, even as a cantrip, might just be not quite the rate that we're after with how efficient Historic is getting. In Standard, it might have been a thing, but in Historic, I don't think it can quite keep up. All right. I think we've talked about... Oh, we haven't talked about Professor of Symbology. This card is great. In your Silver Quill or Lorehold decks, this fits in both of them. This is one of the best ways to learn in the entire set. The fact that you get a 2/1 for 2 and get a card is great. This is a card that you want every single time you see it. If you're in these colors, grab this card. Mavinda. This is not Feather. It's not as good as Feather, but if you're in a deck where you have a decent number of combat tricks, this card is going to be fantastic. I don't think there's any situation where casting the card for that 8 mana extra tax is going to be a thing, so it really needs to be combat tricks that target creatures you control. And you want to be able to kind of use it right away. So if you have a protection spell in your graveyard, you want to cast this when you have 5 mana available, not 3, so that you have that extra spell up, so you can get value off of this right away. All right. Explosive Welcome. I don't think you're going to want to play this card very often. There is a chance that Prismari decks can get to this, but I think it's largely unexciting. I would not go for this one. Teachings of the Archaics, on the other hand, is going to be pretty decent. It's a little situational. It's only there to catch you up, and it can draw 2, in which case it's Divination, or 3 if you're really behind. I think this card it's okay. The fact that it gets to sit in your sideboard is really what makes it worth your time. If you had to put this in main deck, I just wouldn't think it ever makes the cut. But since it can sit in your sideboard, and when you're behind, you go grab it, get a refill, I think it's going to be pretty darn good in limited formats. Another Village Rites. Let's see, what else do we have here? Frost Trickster. It's a Windrake and a Frost Lynx on the same card. This card is spectacular and limited. It just does absolutely everything you could ever wish for a creature to do for you. If you're in blue, you draft every single one of these that you can find. Great, great, great card. Ingenious Mastery, I think this is all right. X draw spells are always a little bit funky, especially when you're trying to figure out how much that cost next to the X is going to impact things. I think you might play this in limited. The fact that again it's a little bit modal, the reduced cost where you give your opponent a little bit of a benefit. I think the benefit you're giving your opponent is not huge here, especially because you get to just draw 3. If you were drawing less for that 3 mana version of this, I don't think it would be worth it. But I think this is worth a try in limited. I'm not super excited about it. Drakengard Elite, I think this is going to be fine in our Quandrix decks. Not super excited about it, because that's not the deck where you're going to be casting a ton of spells, but you're going to get some out of it for sure. Quandrix Cultivator, I think, is going to be spectacular. A 4 mana 3/4 is already a decent rate. Getting to ramp yourself in these Quandrix decks is really important. I think you're going to play this all day long. Another Faithless Looting, you love to see it. All right, Reflective Golem I think is all right. This is one of the few other artifacts that I think you might play in limited, but it's really narrow in scope, so it has to be in the right deck. It's kind of like that build around C. I wouldn't draft this aggressively at all, but if you have a deck that fits it and there's nothing else worth taking, you can fit this in. It's filler. Primal Command. This is, of course, fantastic and limited. Getting these options are really spectacular. I don't know if we're going to see this in constructed at all in historic, but if you see this in limited and you're in green, go ahead and grab it. Another Valentine, Stormkiln Artist. We talked about this in my spoiler video. I think this is spectacular. I think you're going to want to play this in limited, in constructed. You're going to have a lot of options for this. Braden from CEDH Cast, of course, is very excited about this in Corvold. Return Past Caller. I talked about this a little bit in my spoiler video. Archaeomancer is a good card, and this is a more aggressive version of it. I think you play this all day unlimited for sure. So if you're in Lorehold and you see this, go ahead and grab it. Doomblade. Yeah, A tier removal in limited. Go ahead and pick this up. I don't think it ages well enough to see play in historic, but it's really cool to see Doomblade making a comeback. Wandering Archaic. This might be the card I am most excited about for Commander. I absolutely love this card. We don't care about Explore the Vast Lands. We only care about the Archaic. As a disruptive card, it's spectacular. If all it did was tax your opponent's spells for 2, that'd be fine. Godpharaoh's Statue saw play. It's a decent card, and this is 1 mana cheaper, and it gets you a body. But the fact that if they can't pay the 2, you get that spell too, it's spectacular. It's absolutely great. This is disruption, this is mana advantage, and this is card advantage all at the same time. I love this card. Decisive Denial, I think, is another playable answer spell. This is something at 2 mana, you're going to see a lot of use for this. The fact that it's fight or a counter is great. I think we're going to see a lot of this card. Mind's Desire. I was definitely excited about this in my spoiler video. I think in historic, this is definitely going to have a home. Don't play this in limited. You're not going to be able to get enough of a storm count to make it worthwhile, and there isn't going to be enough power in your deck to make it worth the random nature of this card. You really want a deck packed with bombs in order for this to be worth your time. 15 left. We're almost there. We're getting there. Another multiple choice. I think we have seen just about all of these cards, so let's see what our rare is. Day of Judgment, it's Wrath of God, but it's very pretty Wrath of God. In limited, of course, you play Wraths all day long. They're really pretty fantastic if you can find them. In historic, I guess, since we already have Wrath of God, it's just an aesthetic choice. Cultivate. If you are seeing this in limited, especially if you're in Quandrix, you play this, you draft as many of these as you can find. Really, really powerful card for limited. Really love to see it here. Teach by example. This is an interesting one when we're thinking about limited, because usually copy spells, fork spells are not worth the effort, but getting this in Prismari in particular, but anytime that you're looking to trigger Magecraft spells, this could be worth the slot. It's going to take a little bit more work to make it happen, but you get way more payoffs in this particular format than you usually do for this kind of spell. So it might see play. I think it's going to depend on how those Prismari decks come together. But if they're working the right way and you have enough Magecraft triggers, this might be more valuable than you initially expect. Body of Research, of course, this is the funny one where you make a absolutely massive creature token that, of course, people can steal with Claim the Firstborn or kill with any basic removal, but it's going to be huge. An absolutely gigantic creature if you get to cast this spell. Dramatic Finale. Creature tokens you control get +1/+1. That alone makes this decently worth it if you have enough token support. This is in Silverquill colors, but it's another one of those all hybrid cards where this might have value in a Witherbloom deck that is making a ton of pests. So look for that in limited. The fact that it creates the Inklings on its own is really what pushes this over the top. I think this is definitely limited playable. It's not quite Ethereal Absolution, but it's working towards that. Let's see. Expel. I don't know if I've talked about this one yet. This is okay removal. This is kind of like B tier removal, but exiling a tapped creature is a good effect for 3. The fact that it's an instant speed means that you can do this during combat when someone has attacked you and not take the hit from the creature. I think this is definitely worth playing. Bookworm. We haven't seen one of these yet. At 8 mana, it's almost unplayable, but as a miniature Palaka Worm, it might be worth it. You put this in your Quandrix deck when you know you can ramp to it, and that's about it. But if you can, this is a great limited finisher. And we got another D-Spark. Another Infuriate. Highwitch. This is a good Witherbloom card for sure in limited. 1/1 flying for 1 it's okay. It's going to poke for a couple of points of damage here, but the fact that this card replaces itself when it dies is what really counts, especially in Witherbloom where you want sacrifice fodder anyway. So when this is no longer useful, you ditch it, you get the effect off of ditching it, and then you get to learn as well. I think this is a pretty darn good card in limited. And we got our first Flame Scroll Celebrant and Revel in Silence. I'm excited about this in Constructed. I don't think this is super exciting and limited, but yeah, having a version of Silence that we can play tacked on to a Harsh Mentor is a really good place to be. I like this card. All right, we got another Revitalize. I think we've talked about most of these that are exciting. Heated Debate. This is good red removal. 4 damage to creature or planeswalker. Can't be countered as kind of just like filler text in limited, but the 4 damage is really where we want to be, especially instant speed. We're happy to see this here. Waterfall Aerialist is okay playable. As a 3/1 flyer for 4, it's not a great rate, but with Ward 2 on it, it's kind of like the 5 mana Orzhov 3/3 flyer. The fact that it's harder for your opponents to deal with makes it playable. If it could just be pinged down for cheap, it would be really, really less exciting. But as it is, they're probably going to have to deal with it in combat, and that 3 power is going to come into play. Another Manifestation Sage. Okay. Final 10. Here we go. Snakeskinvale, if you've played this in Kaldheim, you know it's definitely a playable card. It's not amazing, but I'm never unhappy to have one in my deck. And of course, this version is brilliant. So if you're in green and you don't have much else to do, this is a reasonable combat trick. Grinning Ignis, we're all excited about this for what it can do in Constructed for storm strategies, but in Limited, it's reasonable ramp as well. So getting to just put this down on board and then play something much bigger the next turn it's a decent place to be. Grinning Ignis will see play in those Prismari decks for sure, because of the fact that it can get you to those big spells a couple of turns early. All right. Mcgoth Titan. I love this card. 4 mana, 11 power. Whenever it attacks or blocks, you sacrifice a creature. If you have pests, that's not hard to do. But of course, getting to convert that 11 power into something useful is really good when you can enable it. There's the cards where you can sacrifice something and then create pests equal to its power. Of course, there's fling effects if you're in Constructed. I think this is going to be a fun card to mess around with. I think it's a bomb in Limited in the right deck, and in Constructed, it's kind of a fun janky card that we're going to have some fun with. Pestilent Cauldron, I think this is a decent card. The fact that it just always does something is pretty cool. Probably the worst effect on here is the each opponent mills cards. But yeah, this is a flexible card, and I think it's going to see some play. Anything else here? No, let's check our rare. We got a Memory Lapse, a tempo counter spell. I think that you can play this in Limited. The fact that it is not blue makes it a little easier to fit in rather than just be a sideboard card. The fact that you don't answer something forever is honestly okay. The fact that you're making them spend more mana than you are and forcing them to draw that spell again rather than something new, I think is worthwhile. Stone Rain, you love to see it. I'm sure there's going to be some crazy Waking the Trolls land destruction deck with this, but I don't think this is Limited playable. Don't draft this card. Prismari Apprentice. This is one of those cards that kind of suggests that there might be an aggressive Prismari deck in Limited. It doesn't really fit the Prismari theme of ramping into big spells, where you really just kind of want to gum up the board and buy time to make that possible. This rewards you for casting those big spells, but it's an aggressive card. So it's not exactly what you want to be doing. You want to win the game with those big cards, not with the 2/2 creature that you're going to turn into a 3/3 unblockable that one time. Okay, definitely a playable card, but not one of those exciting ones. This is kind of what I was talking about when I said the cycle of apprentices is not as exciting in this set as the guilds, and it's really all about the named students, the legendary creatures. Got a wild card, always happy to see that. Prismari Command, like I said, I'm really excited about this one. I like this card. I think it just always does something useful. We got a Charge Through, which is the green Crash Through. Only hits one creature rather than your entire board, but it is a cantrip. It is instant speed. If you have Magecraft synergies, you might play this. And Mizzix's Mastery. Love to see this one. In Limited, I think that you play this all the time. Being able to hit one of your big spells out of your graveyard is fantastic. If you get to that crazy point in the game where you're casting something for 8, which is exactly what Prismari wants to do, then you get to cast all of them. And if you dumped a bunch of those big spells into your graveyard, this is going to be game ending. It's absolutely fantastic. And of course, in Constructed, this is our spell version of Sneak Attack. So in Constructed, you're going to be able to easily put big things into your graveyard and then cast them for cheap with Mizzix's Mastery. We're going to see this in Historic for sure. All right. Lash of Malice, I think, is going to be okay removal. It's going to be an alright combat trick from time to time, too. I think this is filler, but it's playable filler. It's not filler you're sad to see in your black decks. Burying Books, I think, is alright. At 5 mana, this effect is okay in Limited. The fact that it can cost 3 is great. It's really, really great. I would say in Quandrix decks in particular, this is going to be pretty decent. And we got a wild card. Love to see it. Final 5, here we go. Defined Gambit. If you're in white and you're missing out on removal, go ahead and draft this. I've played this a few times in Limited, and it's not as bad as it looks if you're careful about when you play it. The key to playing Divine Gambit is you can't cast it before turn 6. You just have to wait until their hand is decently empty, and if they manage to replace the permanent that you get rid of, it's probably going to be something worse. You've got to wait for that big bomb when their hand is reasonably empty. If you play this early, you're asking to get blown out. Most of the times I've cast this, I've found a situation where my opponent had an empty hand, and it was just fantastic. Only one time did I exile a Lindworm, and my opponent had one card in hand, and it was another Lindworm, and that felt terrible. But don't shy away from this card if you don't have something better. It is playable removal. It's just not great removal. Okay. Verdant Mastery, it's another one of those modal cost spells. Getting some extra lands is decent. There's going to be a home for this somewhere, but I'm not super excited about this one. We got another double major. We already talked about that one. I don't think there is too much else here. Oh, Pillar Drop Rescuer. I'm sure we've seen some of these before and I've just glossed over them. Getting a creature mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to your hand, I'm happy to see this. Master Scald sees play, even though that's not restricted by mana value, it's grabbing you an artifact or enchantment. Recursion in limited is usually pretty good, and this one gives you a body, a flying body at that. So I would definitely say this is worth playing if you have some mana value 3 things that are worth getting back. Killian is one that is really exciting. It's a powerful card that's going to soak up a ton of removal. So if you have Killians, you're playing that Silver Quill deck, grab your Pillar Drop Rescuers so you can get your Killian back. And we got a Brainstorm. I'm really excited for Brainstorm in Historic. I think you can play it in Limited. It's just playable. It's not super exciting. Opt might actually be better to find in Limited than Brainstorm. But I think in Historic, it's definitely going to find a home. Without fetch lands, it's not quite as powerful as it is in Legacy, of course. If we had fetch lands, I don't think they would have given us this card in Historic in a million years. But there's enough ways to manipulate the top of your library, or in certain decks, especially constructed Magecraft decks, where you just need to make sure you have the right cards in your hand this turn so you can win now. Brainstorm's going to have a home. It's going to be a little different, where instead of brainstorming for value to craft for the future, you're really brainstorming for now, in order to make sure that you have what you need to do what you want this turn, and you're not expecting to end up in a brainstorm lock where the trash cards you put back into your deck are what you end up drawing. You're looking to end the game before that point. 3 more. We're almost there, folks. Another Village Rites, another Flunk. Let's see what our rare is. Alright, we got another wild card. I'm always happy to see those. 2 more. Closing in on the end. Rip Apart. Really happy to see one of these. This is going to be excellent removal. You draft this, of course, every single day of the week. This card is spectacular, I think, everywhere. Its flexibility is kind of second to none. Only Fracture is nearly as flexible, and it can't hit creatures or planeswalkers. So Rip Apart, I think, is going to see a ton of play in Constructed, in Limited, just about everywhere. Closing Statement. I don't think we've seen one of these yet. This is great removal. It would be great removal if it didn't have the option to be cheaper. I think that if you're in Silver Quill, you're drafting this every time you see it. Illuminate History, it's another decent lesson. It's one of those that gives you a way to just ditch your dead cards and get something decent, and then get a creature out of it. I think if you're in the Lorehold deck, this might be something worth grabbing, but it's not a rare that you're going to pick over like A tier removal. All right, final pack. Let's see what we get. Another Whirlwind Denial. Eureka Moment. It's the big growth spiral. I don't think we had seen one of these yet. Definitely a playable card. Drawing 2 and getting land out is exactly what Quandrix wants to be doing. The fact that it's not as good as Growth Spiral, who cares? This is good and limited. You're going to draft this for sure. And our final rare is Basic Conjuration. A little bit of card selection, a little bit of life gain. I can see you tossing this in your Witherbloom sideboards, especially for those life gain synergies. But again, as a lesson, it's one of those ones that's it's kind of all right. All right, so that was 53 packs of Strixhaven. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm really excited to play these cards. I'm really excited to share that gameplay with you coming up. So if you like what I do, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and get that bell on so you get those notifications whenever I upload a new video. I hope you had a good time. I know I did. I'll talk to you all soon.